Hey everyone, me Kevin here. Wow, the Pentagon has finally recognized that they effed up. They finally came clean about this. Take a look at this, folks. 7 days ago, I posted this tweet. What an effing disgrace. Left my dad's birthday dinner to watch this, and now I'm shaken and in tears. And I'm going to show you exactly what this is. But it has to do with 10 innocent people getting killed in the drone strike in Kabul. Now, I said that I was going to post a full reaction video. At the end of my dad's birthday, I was not capable of posting a reaction video, and I decided next day that I needed to focus more on the campaign than on national politics. Now that the election is over, however, guess what also came out? Look at this. 7 days after the New York Times exposed the Biden administration, specifically the Pentagon, for the drone strike that killed 10 civilians in Kabul. 7 days after, so a full week after, the Pentagon acknowledged on Friday that a U.S. drone strike in Afghanistan on August 29th was a necessary, or originally said was necessary to prevent an attack on American troops, was a tragic mistake that killed 10 civilians and 7 children. This is absolutely bad. Now, I know mistakes happen in war, but this isn't even close to a mistake. And I'll show you why. Because I linked the video to what actually happened 7 days ago on Twitter. So follow me on Twitter if you have not seen it yet. But what I encourage you to do, implore you to do, is watch some of this with me because this is insane. Now, I'll skip around a little bit and I'll encourage you to watch the full thing at the New York Times, but I want to add my commentary to this, which I think you'll find beneficial. Take a look at this because it's very, very disturbing, but in terms of the facts around what happened, it's not like you see really graphic things. It's more about the facts around what happened that are very... Okay, so the New York Times begins by showing footage of how a car parked in a courtyard was destroyed. And this person was the target. And apparently, up to 7 of his children were all also killed. And what the New York Times did is they flew to Kabul and investigated this since the date of the drone strike. They interviewed experts, weapons experts, they took photographs, they went to the scene, they conducted interviews, and I'm not trying to shill the New York Times here, but they did some really incredible investigative work. Let's go ahead and play some parts of this, starting right here.
The procedures were correctly followed, and it was a righteous strike.
It's worth noting why they say this up front. It says the procedures were correctly followed. Well, in this video, you're going to see how those procedures were followed.
And ended his day by pulling up to his house. Soon after, his Toyota was hit with a 20-pound Hellfire missile. What was interpreted as the suspicious moves of a terrorist may have just been an average day in his life.
And was, since the Pentagon admitted it.
It's possible that what the military saw Ahmadi loading into his car were water canisters he was bringing home to his family, not explosives. Using never-before-seen security camera footage of Ahmadi, interviews with his family, co-workers, and witnesses, we will piece together, for the first time, his movements in the hours before he was killed.
This is incredible, by the way, the reconstruction here.
Zemrai Ahmadi was an electrical engineer by training. For 14 years, he had worked for the Kabul office of Nutrition and Education International.
NEI established a total of 11 soybean processing plants in Afghanistan.
It's a California-based NGO that fights malnutrition.
Listen to that. He worked for a non-government organization providing food for people who were starving.
On most days, he drove one of the company's white Toyota Corollas.
They've referenced white Toyota Corolla about 3 times now. That's because it's a very important detail.
Taking his colleagues to and from work and distributing the NGO's food to Afghans displaced by the war. Only 3 days before Ahmadi was killed, 13 U.S. troops and more than 170 Afghan civilians died in an Islamic State suicide attack at the airport. The military had given lower-level commanders the authority to order airstrikes earlier in the evacuation, and they were bracing for what they feared was another imminent attack. To reconstruct...
This, by the way, ends up becoming also important, that lower level individuals were authorized to carry out airstrikes because the Pentagon wanted you to believe that these airstrikes were being conducted after hours of painstaking research. Well, that ended up not being true, according to what the New York Times found out. Again, not trying to shield the New York Times, but what they say and prove in this video with what they're showing, very powerful.
Ahmadi's movement on August 29th, in the hours before he was killed. The Times pieced together the security camera footage from his office with interviews with more than a dozen of Ahmadi's colleagues and family members. Ahmadi appears to have left his home around 9 a.m. He then picked up a colleague and his boss's laptop near his house. It's around this time that the U.S. military claimed it observed a white sedan leaving an alleged Islamic State safe house around 5 kilometers northwest of the airport. That's why the U.S. military said they tracked Ahmadi's Corolla that day. They also said they intercepted communications from the safe house, instructing the car to make several stops. But every colleague who rode with Ahmadi that day said what the military interpreted as a series of suspicious moves was just a typical day in his life. After Ahmadi picked up another colleague, the three stopped to get breakfast, and at 9:35 a.m., they arrived at the NGO's office.
I'm going to just provide some extra detail here really quick because I think it's better to provide this context up front. The United States military received intel that a white Corolla was being used for a potential attack by ISIS. They were tracking this one, though, which is the innocent white Corolla. Let's keep going.
Later that morning, Ahmadi drove some of his coworkers to a Taliban-occupied police station to get permission for future food distribution at a new displacement camp.
What a disgrace.
Ahmadi and his colleagues returned to the office. The security...
Like, how could you fail so badly? The guy's picking up food and water for people.
Camera footage we obtained from the office is crucial to understanding what happens next. The camera's timestamp is off, but we went to the office and verified the time. We also matched an exact scene from the footage with a timestamped satellite image to confirm it was accurate. At 2:35 p.m., Ahmadi pulls out a hose, and then he and a coworker fill empty containers with water.
Okay, these containers become very important because the way this looks, it's kind of like, how do we know that's water? What if that's gas? What if they're filling them up with stuff that's going to go boom pow after a primary explosion, and that these tanks would be secondary explosions, right? I want you to right now think to yourself, if you filled up a gas canister with fuel and then it exploded, what do you think the gas canister would look like after the explosion? Okay, think about that. Remember that. That becomes very important.
Earlier that morning, we saw Ahmadi bring these same empty plastic containers to the office. There was a water shortage in his neighborhood, his family said, so he regularly brought water home from the office. At around 3:38 p.m., a colleague moves Ahmadi's car further into the driveway. A senior U.S. official told us that at roughly the same time, the military saw Ahmadi's car pull into an unknown compound 8 to 12 kilometers southwest of the airport. That overlaps with the location of the NGO's office, which we believe is what the military called an unknown compound.
How can you call it an unknown compound when there's literally a sign on the wall that tells you it's the NGO? Like, did y'all try Googling it? Did you try calling the NGO first? Did you try linking potentially the fact that these people are carrying around water jugs and food with the fact that the billboards say they deal with water and food? Is this what our CIA is doing? Come on.
With the workday ending...
And I get it. It's like, oh, come on, Kevin, though. That'd be a clever front. You know, put bombs and food, right? You got to put all the pieces of the puzzle together before you bomb someone, okay?
An employee switched off the office generator, and the feed from the camera ends. We don't have footage of the moments that followed. But it's at this time, the military said, that its drone feed showed 4 men gingerly loading wrapped packages into the car. Officials said they couldn't tell what was inside them. This footage from earlier in the day shows what the men said they were carrying: their laptops, one in a plastic shopping bag. And the only things in the trunk, Ahmadi's coworker said, were the water containers. Ahmadi dropped each one of them off, then drove to his home.
And don't get me wrong, I'm just pausing because I want to give the benefit of the doubt here. It's like some of this stuff looks a little sus, right? It's kind of like, picking up a lot of people, you're matching the description in a white Corolla. We hear that the white Corolla is planning an attack. You're loading barrels and hosing stuff into these barrels and loading into car. Like, some of it looks sus, but you would expect that the United States military would just go a little bit further before bombing someone.
In a dense neighborhood near the airport, he backed into the home's small courtyard. Children surrounded the car, according to his brother. A U.S. official said the military feared the car would leave again and go into an even more crowded street or to the airport itself.
I just want to quickly mention, in case you didn't see the transcription there, they said that when the individual would come home, it was habit that the children would come outside, greet the family man, and hang out and play inside of the car, which ended up being the target of a Hellfire missile.
The drone operators, who hadn't been watching Ahmadi's home at all that day, quickly scanned the courtyard and said they saw only one adult male talking to the driver and no children. They decided this was the moment to strike.
It's worth noting that there was there were leaked reports that the other killings, a day, 2 days after this drone strike, when these other deaths were revealed, were referred to as bug splat. Chilling. Disgusting.
A U.S. official told us that the strike on Ahmadi's car was conducted by an MQ-9 Reaper drone that fired a single Hellfire missile with a 20-pound warhead. We found remnants of the missile, which experts said matched a Hellfire at the scene of the attack. In the days after the attack, the Pentagon repeatedly claimed that the missile strike set off other explosions, and that these likely killed the civilians in the courtyard.
Significant secondary explosions from the targeted vehicle indicated the presence of a substantial amount of explosive material.
This, by the way, is what our government looks like when it's literally spewing BS. Like, literally spewing BS. There was no evidence of secondary explosions. Zero evidence of secondary explosions. And you'll see that in the pictures here in a moment. Especially, remember those water jugs I told you about? So I don't know, either they're lying, or they don't even know that they don't even know.
Because there were secondary explosions, there's a reasonable conclusion to be made that there was explosives in that vehicle.
But a senior military official later told us that it was only possible to probable that explosives in the car caused another blast. We gathered photos and videos of the scene taken by journalists and visited the courtyard multiple times. We shared the evidence with 3 weapons experts who said the damage was consistent with the impact of a Hellfire missile. They pointed to the small crater beneath Ahmadi's car and the damage from the metal fragments of the warhead. This plastic melted as a result of a car fire triggered by the missile strike. All 3 experts also pointed out what was missing: any evidence of the large secondary explosions described by the Pentagon. No collapsed or blown out walls, including next to the trunk with the alleged explosives. No sign that a second car...
Yeah, in that last frame there, let's see if I can go back. Look at that trunk. If there were secondary explosions from the trunk, don't you think this would be pretty dang damaged? And they'll show you in just a moment the water jugs, which you can actually see some of them over here. But you'll see some that directly come from the trunk.
Including next to the trunk with the alleged explosives. No sign that a second car parked in the courtyard was overturned by a large blast. No destroyed vegetation. All of this matches what eyewitnesses told us, that a single missile exploded and triggered a large fire. There is one final detail visible in the wreckage,
There it is.
Containers, identical to the ones that Ahmadi and his colleague filled with water and loaded into his trunk before heading home. Even though the military said the drone team watched the car for 8 hours that day, a senior official also said they weren't aware of any water containers.
like right there. That is such a crucial detail. One half of the military, or one side of the military, is going, we watched that compound for 8 hours. And somebody else was like, what water jugs? We didn't see any water jugs while we were watching them for 8 hours before we bombed them. Really? That's what they were doing all freaking day long. Or at least that's what we saw in the footage multiple times. Water jugs outside the car, water jugs being filled in, water jugs being transported there from a different location, water jugs being put into the back of the trunk. How do you miss that?
The Pentagon has not provided the Times with evidence of explosives in Ahmadi's vehicle or shared what they say is the intelligence that linked him to the Islamic State.
Exactly.
But the morning
Disgrace.
after the U.S. killed Ahmadi, the Islamic State did launch rockets at the airport from a residential area Ahmadi had driven through the previous day. And the vehicle they used was a white Toyota.
There it is. See? Remember I told you early on, there was evidence of a white Corolla being potentially involved in a terrorist attack. The military was just tracking the wrong Corolla, apparently failed to properly communicate with drone operators and surveillance crews, and they targeted the wrong one, then lied about the fact that they tracked this Corolla for 8 hours, then lied about the fact that there were secondary explosions when there was no evidence of that. We saw it in the pictures with our own eyes. The water jugs were fine, the jugs they didn't even know about, and killed 7 children, 10 people in total. When I first watched this video, my heart was shattered. Like, how could you screw up that badly? This is, like, that wasn't even close. There wasn't even an imminent threat. The guy was parked at home. It's not like he was driving to the airport. You know, it's like one thing. It's like, oh crap, he's going to the airport. Oh no, you know, like maybe there'd be like 1% more, or I mean, really there shouldn't be based on all the prior evidence, but at least maybe that'd be like, oh, the threat is now imminent, right? No, this was just, oh, let's just get him while he's isolated, which I also get because you don't want to cause collateral damage and hurt other people, but at least have your intelligence correct, which was clearly flawed here. There was obviously more time if the person had just driven into the compound. There was obviously more time, nothing indicating that he was just ready to leave now. Disgrace. Absolute disgrace. That now 7 children have lost their lives, 3 adults, for nothing. People who are working to survive, or like to provide people with more food and to provide people with suffering from malnutrition with proper nutrition, and then the government lies about it until the New York Times exposes them, and then it literally takes a full week after the New York Times exposes the government for the government to go, yeah, we effed up. Now, credit to them. At least they finally acknowledged it, because when this story first broke, it did not get the media attention that I thought it deserved. That's why I tweeted it and thinking this is a disgrace. Now it's getting the media attention it deserves.